Good evening and welcome to New York City Atheists Live on Tape, brought to you by New York City Atheists. I'm your host, Dennis Horvitz, the David Letterman of the Hopelessly Damned. We have some wonderful news. I just found out earlier this morning that we have acquired a third viewer. I was stopped on the subway by someone by the name of Raphael, and he congratulated me and told me how much he enjoyed the show. So I just want to give a shout to Raphael wherever you are. I don't know when you're going to be seeing this, but thanks for your compliment, and please tell your friends. Now tonight, we've got kind of a 2-for-1. Our main guest is John A. ARETAKIS, who is an attorney representing 200 victims of clergy sexual abuse, and in addition to an extra 100 who are victims of non-clergy sexual abuse. And he is a supporter of SNAP, and he told me what SNAP means, and of course I completely forgot it on the way to the podium. But he will, so stand by. And dropping by to join John is Father Bob Hodson, who runs the organization Road to Recovery, and that is also devoted to victims of clergy sexual abuse. And hopefully we will get it up on the screen during the show. But just for your edification, Road to Recovery can be accessed by going to www.road-to-recovery.org. So without further ado, I just want to introduce John A. ARETAKIS.
Good afternoon. My name is John ARETAKIS. Born into the Greek Orthodox Church, reluctantly. About 15 years ago, I got pulled into the clergy sexual abuse movement because an old friend of mine from high school said, "John, I've got to tell you a story you wouldn't believe." And I've been to 10 other lawyers. No one would take my case. No one would take on the power and money of the Roman Catholic Church. And I thought, since you were a little bit aggressive back when we played football in the mid-'70s, that maybe you'd take a stab at it. Well, I went to a bishop up in Albany and I said, "Bishop, I must have run into the only bad priest in the country, because he raped a friend of mine back in high school for 5 years, just about every weekend for several years. And then, as all of these predators do, he remained in this family's life for decades. He ended up marrying this child who he abused. He ended up marrying him 10 or 15 years later and married all 4 of his sisters and stayed like a close family relative until this boy came to me in 1995 and asked me for help. Well, I went to the bishop and I said I ran into the only bad priest in the country, which I honestly thought back then, and I told the priest that, told the bishop that I needed $1 million to settle the case. And within a month's time, he gave me a check for $1 million. I had no idea that I was part of the cover-up because I signed a confidentiality agreement. So I held this very big secret, tried to even keep it from my wife just in case, but for many, many years, until the clergy abuse crisis exploded on the national scene in Boston. And I like to give the date of around January of '02, because that's when Father Shanley and Father Gagan were being tried and convicted in the courts out in Massachusetts for raping little children, hundreds and hundreds of them. I am going to give somewhat of a disconnected talk today. I do understand my audience, and I very much respect what you are all committed to. And I want to tell you that if I do go off on tangents, which I promise you I will, that fundamentally my main thesis is, and always will be, that adults in significant positions of power and authority in our country have allowed the sexual abuse of children. And I have been primarily focused on exposing the corruption in the Catholic Church and allowing this to go on, because this has been going on for decades, possibly centuries, but I'm not old enough to investigate and explore some of the earlier cases. Now, I will start off by telling you a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Brooklyn. My father sold coffee. He was a traveling salesman. So up until the age of 15, every single restaurant and diner I ever walked in, I always came through the kitchen, because that was my entranceway. And of course, the first half of my life I was embarrassed and humiliated at that, and now I take it as a badge of honor, walking through the kitchen. I was born in Brooklyn, and right after the Mets won the World Series in 1969, we moved up to Albany because that's where my father sold his coffee in upstate New York. So I am from both Brooklyn and Manhattan, and also in Albany, where my wife and family and new puppy live. So I have some sort of an Amtrak relationship with my wife and family. I actually walked here from my apartment, which is only a few blocks away over on the east side. I went to law school, got my doctorate, and then went on to Georgetown Law School and got a master's in law. Very few people do that, but I thought I wanted to be a law school professor and never went on to that. Ended up making a lot of money representing victims who were hurt in car accidents, harassment at work, abuse cases, and that sort of thing. And then, of course, what some of you may remember, when NASDAQ went from 5,000 to 1,000, I lost all my money, and then the market crashed again after the World Trade Center, and I got pulled into the clergy abuse crisis, and I'm one of probably a dozen or 24 lawyers in the entire country that does only clergy sexual abuse. I'm one of 2 lawyers in the whole state of New York that represents over 200 people abused by priests. The Catholic Church, what have they done wrong? How have they failed children? I will tell you my thesis, and I will try to confine it to about 2 sentences. And that is, before I say that, what it is, I want to start by telling you that for a heterosexual male, I am as pro-gay rights, pro-civil rights, and pro-human rights as a person can be. There's not an anti-gay bone in my body. My secretary of 19 years is a gay man who's publicly identified himself as being HIV positive for 15 years, and he wouldn't let a letter go out on my stationery that was homophobic or the least bit anti-gay. So I want to say that. However, I do want to say that the problem in the Catholic Church has been a problem of silence. And I must tell you why that is. The Catholic Church is made up of about 50,000 priests. It's actually 49,000 Catholic priests, and another 100,000 religious. And what religious are is they're like Jesuits or Franciscans or nuns. So they're all like ordained priests. There's a total of 150,000 in this country, but only 50,000 are member of dioceses. We've been successful at removing about 4% of those priests in the past 5 years, and my opinion is that the numbers are far, far greater. It possibly could go over 10% of the priests in this country for the last 4 decades have been abusing children. And if you all know the statistics about the abuse of children, an average pedophile abuses probably 200 to 300 children in their lifetime. So there are hundreds of thousands of victims of abuse out there, of clergy abuse. There are, in my opinion, 50 million Americans who were sexually abused by an adult as children. So I just don't confine my work to clergy. I'm kind of an all-purpose attorney who represents people who were abused decades and decades ago. And of course we have a statute of limitations that kind of prevents a lot of people from suing unless certain factors and certain criteria are met to sue on decades-old abuse. And I explore that all in a case-by-case analysis. So if you understand the premise that I have indicated initially, that I am pro-gay, and I do support gay rights and gay movement, and I am against discrimination of any kind, I will tell you that primarily the problem of clergy sex abuse has been a problem of homosexuality. The Catholic Church, and I bring Father Hotzen almost like a living, breathing Catholic priest who can support me and be a witness to some of the things I say, and rein me in, so to speak. The Catholic Church and the Catholic priests and religious are well over 50% gay in this country. Actually, when I learned this back in the 90s, I was actually very proud that there was a profession that was almost anti-discriminatory. In other words, there was a profession out there that if you were gay, you were not only welcomed, but you could easily advance. It sounds like a good thing. But of course, the Vatican says that priests are to remain celibate. And the Vatican, where all church authority emanates from, says that if you are homosexual and engage in homosexual acts, you have a clearly defined mental disorder. So we have here is this dialectic where we have the Vatican and the Pope and the Church saying homosexuality is wrong, it is bad, it is unholy, you won't go to heaven, and it's a mental disorder. And we have the priests in this country who, I'll just give a conservative number, 50, maybe 60%, are actively gay and living gay lifestyles. I think in some dioceses, like the Albany diocese, is more like 75 or 80%. You have this homosexual cult involved in educating, teaching our children, and preaching every weekend at Mass and their liturgies and sermons and giving advice to people on a multitude of levels. So now, I need to clarify something as well, because now some of you could be sitting back saying, uh-oh, is he tying homosexuality to pedophilia? Absolutely not. Pedophilia is a crime of power. Yes, 3 out of 4 or 3 out of 5 of the children abused are little boys, but there is no correlation, at least scientifically, to pedophilia and homosexuality. In other words, straight men, heterosexual men, abuse children just as much as homosexual men. So I'm not drawing that analogy. However, if you are in a profession where more than half of the men are gay, living gay lifestyles, and then you're a pedophile, which maybe is 5%, maybe 10% of the priests, and you get into this profession where everybody else is in the closet and hiding, you abuse children, and everyone that you work with knows about it, and everybody goes like this. No one speaks. It's like when the ACT UP organization used to do its protesting, they used to say silence equals death. Well, we should adopt the same slogan, Father Bob, because silence has equaled harm to hundreds and hundreds of thousands of children. And I know that even though I represent 250 children abused by priests and another lawyer has 250, 1 in 100 people come forward. It is so humiliating, it's so embarrassing, it is so disconcerting, especially after you've achieved some sort of a modicum of success in life, to come forward at the age of 30 and 40 and say, you know, my first sexual experience was a 60-year-old priest with whiskey smell on his breath, and he took me into the rectory and he performed a sexual act on me. It's very difficult to say that, whether you're straight, gay, or whatever are you. So it's a very difficult thing to talk about. I am proud to talk about it because I believe that sunlight is the best disinfectant. Now, that leads me to the conclusion that this kind of an informal blackmail of these monsters who are pedophiles, they have this power over all of the other priests who are either good priests, obedient priests, not harming anyone, gay priests, gay bishops, of which there are a tremendous amount of. They have this blackmail, which is, if you tell on me for molesting these altar boys, I can expose you to a higher authority and have you removed from your lifetime vocation. It is unacceptable, it is unbelievable, and it still goes on presently today. The Catholic Church is as dysfunctional as you could ever imagine. And speaking to a group of atheists, I don't say that to placate you or to make you like me. I tell it to you because it is a fact. And I have had a tremendously difficult time in exposing these crimes against children, these crimes against humanity, because the general population is not only so rigid in their belief in God or of their respective opinions of God, whether they be Christian or Protestant or Catholic or even Jewish or Greek Orthodox as I was raised, that it's very hard to permeate into the generalized, recognized society that a religious organization can be so cruel and corrupt to the core. Now, fundamentally, do I have a problem with Catholicism, the beliefs of Catholics, the freedom to believe as you want? Obviously, I don't. But what has happened is the power structure in the church is so geared towards continuing their power and holding on to their money and their assets and their position in society that they need to cover up scandal. And actually, Father Bob Hotzen, who's a Catholic priest who I admire tremendously, it almost sounds like he's a heretic for talking against his Catholicism. But he's not really speaking against his Catholicism. He's not speaking against the teachings of the church. He's speaking against the power authorities in the church. I'll give you one example. I usually start all my speeches with saying, listen, I want everyone to really clearly understand that everything I'm saying is my opinion. Because once you give that word, now you can't be sued. Or you can put it in a legal document, in a pleading, in a court case, and you can't be sued there. So most of the things I am saying are opinion, but certain things I am not saying, certain things I'm saying are not my opinion, which is Cardinal Egan, the head of the New York Archdiocese with 3 million Catholics, is absolutely, unequivocally, 100% gay. I don't have a problem saying that. I don't hate the man for doing that. To my knowledge, he's never abused a child, so I don't have any problem with Cardinal Egan being gay. The problem is, if he admitted that to the Vatican, and he admitted it publicly, we know where he'd be. He'd be out. So he can't admit it. My problem with Cardinal Egan is his being gay has so compromised him, because coming up the ladder so many other priests know about his private lifestyle, that he can't turn on pedophiles. That's it in a nutshell. The bishops and the cardinals have to protect pedophiles, or else they will be exposed. I love the fact that Cardinal Egan is a gay man. I'm happy that a gay person can achieve such success and such a high position in our culture and society. I mean, even living in a progressive city like New York City. I'm proud of that achievement. But the fact that he's compromised and he is basically being blackmailed into silence has allowed children to be at risk. Now, gets us to some of our other questions, and people don't understand this. Why do people in California get $500 million they settled all these cases for about 6 months ago? In Boston, they got $85 million about 5 years ago. And in New York State, we see none of these settlements. We have a statute of limitations problem. And what Cardinal Egan is doing underneath the surface that nobody sees is he's lobbying all these Catholic legislators in the state Senate, mostly, not in the Assembly, to hold on to this bill that would give us some sense of justice. And this bill we're waiting on is from this lovely Assemblywoman in Queens named Margaret Markey. She's given us this bill called Windows legislation, which is you could be abused 10 years ago, or like Father Hotzen 40 years ago, or like some other people 50 years ago, and you have a 1-year window to sue. In the past 3 years, that bill has passed the Assembly by wide margins, something like 110 to 30. And in the Senate, in the state Senate of New York, we have Republican support and Democratic support. But this evil old man named Joe Bruno, who hopefully will be indicted in the next couple of months, has been keeping that bill from coming out of the Codes Committee. Why? Because he's owned and operated and effectively a subsidiary of the Catholic Church. They give him hundreds of thousands of dollars in a lot of different ways, some secret and some not so secret. Some you might have read of in the FBI report about Senator Bruno. But regardless of that, we have not been able to get this type of justice. Now, what does that mean on a practical level? When people in Massachusetts get 6 figures for being abused by a priest, and people in California get 7 figures, and people in a progressive state like New York get 0. Well, that means that New York State has become and continues to be a safe harbor for pedophiles. The only way we can get these churches to police themselves is to make them pay. Right now, Cardinal Egan says, well, you know that priest that we have who's had those problems with all those altar boys on West 57th Street? You know, let's keep him there because, you know, we really haven't had to pay for any of his crimes or his sins or his torts. In California, though, when they have to pay $1 million per claim, the church knows that all these files that they've been hiding under this guise of the separation of church and state from the First Amendment, these people can't be protected because we've had to pay $1 million for all the children they've abused. So then the church has a vested interest in yanking out pedophiles from ministry. And I'll tell you something, pedophiles in ministry is very dangerous because the power of that collar is a power unlike you will never imagine. Little Jimmy, little Johnny, you tell anyone that I abused you, and your parents will lose their jobs. You'll go to hell. You'll burn in hell. Your parents will be excommunicated. The power of the collar is so powerful that it keeps people shamed into silence. And I don't want to be disregarding people who are abused by a Cub Scout leader or a football coach or by a nun or something else, but the priest has that exceptional type of power over somebody. And that leads me to my next point. and it's somewhat controversial to say this, but I have been floating this in the last few talks that I have given, and that is the Catholic Church, to some extent, in my opinion, operates like a cult. What does a cult mean? Of course, a cult means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but to me what a cult means is blind faith, strict obedience to a hierarchical structure, and some degree of being brainwashed. And I will tell you how my personal transformation has occurred about the Catholic Church taking on some of the connotations of a cult. Out of the 250 people that I represent who have been abused by priests, almost all of their parents believe them. Almost all. My child was abused. He started hitting the bottle at 14. I knew something was wrong. His grades went down, or her grades went down. She couldn't focus. She flunked out of college. This all makes sense. They've had 4 or 5 divorces. They can't hold down a job. Academically, they were superior. I believe them when they say they had a cataclysmic event in their life and they were abused by a priest, and I never knew about it. But about 20% of the parents of these children who are now adults who have hired me are on the side of the church. They're against their own children who've been abused. If that's not a sign and symptom of a cult, what is? My child was raped and sodomized by a priest who was 50 or 60 years old, and has ruined that child's life, and I, as a parent, am also a victim because they abused me as well, my trust. But I don't want my kids suing the church and getting money. No, 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 no. That's my ticket to heaven. Don't threaten me with that. So the Catholic Church operates as some form of a cult. Several judges I have run into, I believe, are part of this cult and have locked the doors of civil justice to me and to many different victims. Now, these are dangerous words, this C word. These are fighting words. But my fundamental belief is that the only way you fix a deep, deep wound is by ripping it open, letting the pus come out, and expose the blood and the gooey pus for everyone to see. And only then can you get real healing. I know, I'm not positive, but it might have been Karl Marx who said that religion is the opium of the masses. I mean, that's fundamentally so true. And the reason why I believe the atheist movement has run into so many roadblocks with established religion, as I have, is because people have a fundamental fear and uncertainty about death. Religion gives them something to hold on to. It gives them a lifeline, especially people in their 60s and 70s. My name recognition, especially in upstate New York, where I choose to fight most of these battles, because here in New York, unless you go into a restaurant and kill 20 people with an Uzi, you're not going to be on the news. So I fight my fights in smaller media markets where I can say I have a 14-year-old girl or boy who was raped by a priest, and they'll say that's a significant news story if they're willing to go public with it. I fight these fights in the media, and well, even to some degree, the media has been like, come on, we've done that story 50 times already. There's a saturation point in that. I think I lost my train of thought a little bit where I was going with this, but what I want to say about this cult-like behavior is, I know what. People have been polling me for the past several years because in 02, 03, and 04, my name recognition and my popularity was through the roof. And just like Cardinal Law, who was thrown out of the Boston Archdiocese about 4 or 5 years ago for allowing this behavior to go on, the bishop's popularity is down in the 20s and 30s, approximately the same as this schmuck who calls himself our President Bush. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to digress. Some of the atheists might be Republicans. I don't mean to insult you. Well, anyway, my name recognition is really astronomical, especially in upstate New York. So what I decided to do about 2 months ago is, even though I am I reside in Manhattan, I vote here, I serve jury duty here, and I live here. I've thrown my hat in the ring in a congressional race up in Albany. Some person who's been in Congress for 25 years just coincidentally happened to step down a few months ago, and 10 people threw their hat in the ring. And so I've been the subject of some polls lately, and my name recognition is astronomical. But what I have found, people who are Catholic in their 60s, 70s, and their 80s, they hate me because they're closer to getting to that promised land, and younger people generally like me and are favorable to me. They're not so much as worried, and hopefully in this day and age with the onset of the internet and all news, network news all the time, you're going to have people who are more openly thinking and don't just rely on this blind faith and whatever the Vatican or their Sunday pastor tries to puke out and infiltrate their minds with. So again, this word cult is a difficult word, and believe me, I tried to vet this through Father Hotzen, and Father Hotzen said, oh, absolutely. I know when I was a priest in good standing, he was a religious for 23 years and a priest of the Newark Archdiocese for the past 10 years. And then a couple of years ago, he hired me to sue the church, and they immediately fired him. And then a week later, they removed him from being the principal of a high school, because that's what the Catholic Church does. They get rid of the good ones, and they keep the bad ones, because those are the ones they can control.